Ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention, please. Please make your way to your seats. Next up, please welcome up editorial page editor and vice president of the Wall Street Journal, Paul Jago.
Thank you, Voice of God, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you here for another evening when we can celebrate two great journalists and celebrate giving opportunity to younger future great journalists. Congratulations to all the Novak Fellows, really inspired by your projects. I hope you understand the great footsteps you're walking in. Bob Novak was mentor and friend of mine, somebody who constantly scooped me the day before my column was supposed to run. Congratulations to Brian Anderson. Speaking as his competitor, I regret to say that he deserves this recognition. City Journal constantly runs pieces that I wish we had run in the Journal, and that's about the best compliment I can offer to a fellow editor. Congratulations also to Benjamin Hill. He exemplifies, I think, what all of us like to think we would do in a comparable situation: be brave and daring and tell the truth to the world. Ben is receiving an award named after my friend Ken Tomlinson, the legendary editor at Reader's Digest, whose son Lucas is now reporting from the war zones in Israel. I was delighted to be able to toss to him on one of our recent Journal editorial reports as he's out there. I'm in the safe confines of a New York studio, and he's out there on the front lines. So thank you to Lucas, and thank you very much to Benjamin Hill. This is, I think, as all of us know, a treacherous time to be a journalist. I really appreciate Roger's words about Evan Gershkovich. We at the Journal are really hoping to get him out as quickly as I can, and if you don't appreciate what it means to somebody who is imprisoned like that, and now it's going on 8 months for him, I can give you the example of Jimmy Lai. Last year at this dinner, I made some remarks about Jimmy when we gave him the Courage Award. And somehow he managed in Stanley Prison to hear about it. And what Jimmy does in prison is one of the things he does is he paints religious pictures. And in the mail not too long after this dinner, something arrived, I didn't know what it was, and it turns out to be one of those religious pictures from Jimmy. And he had now written on the side of it, "Paul, yes." He's now been in prison for more than 1,000 days, and he's finally facing trial on national security charges, which of course are false, next month at the age of 75. Knowing, if you're in that situation, that the world has not forgotten about you is so important. And it also puts pressure on the United States government to help both Evan and Jimmy escape from their prisons. So let's keep them in our hearts and minds. So this is also, I think, as all of you know, an increasingly dangerous world. And I remember a time when I was living in Hong Kong in the 1980s, and I came back to headquarters and stopped into the Journal, and Bob Bartley was holding court, former editor of the Journal, And I remember him saying, and it was striking at the time, it stuck with me, at one point he said, you know, I don't really know what to write about. Everything is going so well. True story. We cannot say the same today, which means it's an especially important time for journalists to try to make sense of this world we're living in, to try to see what is happening plainly, to tell the truth about it to the world, and then when we can, try to make it a little better so we can get back to that the days of Bartley in the 1980s. And that's one of the reasons we established the Rago Memorial Fellowship. The fellowship is named, of course, for our former colleague, friend, Joe Rago, who died in 2017 at age 34. Joe was a brilliant reporter and writer, a delightful colleague and a friend. And every so often I dip back into the Rago archive just to remind myself of his abilities. And I will still remember his editorial on Ivanka Trump's business of importing flammable scarves from China while her father was proposing tariffs on Chinese goods. And with his trademark wit, Joe wrote that, quote, "Thankfully, no one has been injured by these combustible accessories." Though a question is whether Donald Trump and his family partners will ever be burned by voters for the disjunction between his political rhetoric and business practices, end quote. Now, you know, when you're writing editorials for a living, the first task is you got to find a way to make people read them. And Joe had that ability. And that kind of humor and perspective is especially valuable, I think, given the state of our politics. Joe had great confidence in American institutions, and he kept a cool head when he was writing about politics when everybody else was losing theirs. And I think today, in this heated, frenetic presidential campaign, wherein he'd be looking at events with cool reason about the campaign, he'd focus on preserving our institutions and their credibility when so many on both sides of the political spectrum seem to want to be willing to trample them for their own ability to keep power. And I think that's good advice for all of us for the coming year. The Rago Fellowship is really part of Joe's legacy. His parents, Paul and Nancy, suggested the idea to me after Joe died. We worked with them, and we worked with TFAS and Roger Ream to construct a fellowship that we are now we selected our 6th Rago Fellow, Sierra McClain, who we'll hear from shortly, who's working already with us. I have to say the programs work spectacularly well, certainly for us, and I hope for the winners. We've had 6 fellows, as I've said, and they all have made real contributions to the journal. We don't let them stick a big toe in and that's it. We throw them right into the deep end. Our first fellow, Elliot Kaufman, is now our letters editor, but more than that, he's been distinguishing himself of late by writing about the war between Hamas and Israel. And in the best tradition of Joe Rago, he's grabbed the subject and is turning out some crackerjack editorials. And it's been fun to see. Matthew King went on to do research for Henry Kissinger, and he's now a naval ensign. And when he's done saving Western civilization, we're hoping to bring him back to do some journalism. Faith Bottom is one of our features editors and had a piece in today's paper, in fact, and we're delighted to have her. Karine Hajar went to the Boston Globe, where we consider her doing evangelical work. But she's doing an excellent job there. And Alessandro Bocci is back doing work, journalism, good journalism in Italy. So I want to thank TFAS, I want to thank the Rago family, and I want to thank everybody who has contributed to making the Rago Fellowship what it is. And we hope to carry on that tradition for a very long time. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Rago, Joe's father, to introduce this year's Rago Fellowship recipient.
Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the Rago family, Nancy, my family here tonight, let me begin by thanking all of you who have so generously contributed to the fund for the Joe Rago Scholarship and Fellowship. Thanks also to those who have helped organize this annual celebration of ideas. To Roger Ream and his colleagues at TFAS, to Paul Jago, and his colleagues at the Journal, and the executives of News Corp, and to the amazing staff of the Metropolitan Club, I thank you. Tonight we gather once again to celebrate true greatness in our midst. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Hall, you have won my appreciation, earned my admiration, and captured my imagination. We also celebrate those whose greatness lies before them here, the recipients of the Novak and the Rago Fellowships. And finally, we acknowledge the greatness of those for whom these awards are given: Thomas Phillips, Kenneth Tomlinson, Robert Novak, and Joe Rago. I'm honored to be here tonight, but by any objective measure, I have no right to stand here before you. I don't write news articles or books, edit a newspaper, or have a podcast, nor am I on TV. You may have guessed that. As they call me at the barbershop, I'm just Joe's dad, Adam's dad, and Grace's dad. I do hope you grade on a curve. But what I can tell you is that the selection panel looks for the types of things we look for in a Rago Fellow. We value brilliance, exceptional writing, and a demonstrated willingness to work tirelessly. And importantly, we place a premium on character. Now, character is the accumulation of many small things practiced daily. How we meet, greet, and treat one another are basically small stuff. But sweating the small stuff made George Washington great. Throughout his life, he carried a handwritten list of small stuff borrowed from a group of French Jesuits. Richard Brookhiser summarized these 110 precepts in his book, Rules of Civility. Imagine that. Civility in only 110 steps. Now, we are recognized by the big stuff, but we are remembered. We are remembered for the small stuff. And we appreciate how many of you have shared small stuff about Joe. The cleaning lady who wept when she learned Joe had passed. The laundry where Joe took his clothes had a Christmas card from him posted on their bulletin board. Larry Kudlow and John Batchelor recalled that Joe was, quote, what we used to call a fine young man. But one of the most memorable notes was a 2017 article by media consultant Bob Brody entitled "The Media Contact Who Got Away." He notes, quote, but what impressed me most about Joe Rago was how he acted in those briefings. He listened closely. He never interrupted. If he disagreed, it was done politely. Afterwards, he thanked all the attendees. Our lives are a lot more than a collection of anecdotes, but character is the precursor of courage, and importantly, it can help you decide whether you want to share a beer with that person. Our Rago Fellow for 2023, Sierra McClain, is one of those people. Like Kimberly Strassel, she's from Oregon, where she grew up on a small ranch. She has a bachelor's degree in history and a master's in journalism from the University of Oregon. Since 2019, she has reported full-time for the Capital Press, a regional newspaper covering agricultural news in the Northwest states. She is prolific. A search of the website will reveal 842 references. Her writing reflects a deep understanding of the practical issues of running a business and the influence of government policy on that. In August, she wrote a detailed review of what it actually takes to meet green energy goals. She masters the details. How many of us know the nuances of lithium mining? She has won national awards and been syndicated in many publications, and she's already published 2 articles in the journal. One addressed the plight of Afghan allies now in the United States, and the second examined anti-Semitism in Philadelphia. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce Sierra McClain as the winner of the Joseph Rago Memorial Fellowship for Excellence in Journalism for 2023. Congratulations. I'll let you speak there. One of those is yours. We'll do that formality later. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for those of you who have supported this fellowship. I am so blessed to be here. I never had the chance to know Joe Rago in person, but through his writings, I feel that he has become a friend and a mentor to me. And I've learned many things from him through his writings and reading about what others have said about him. But because we don't have time to be here all night, I'm going to focus on just 3 things: his commitment to his craft, his kindness to others, and his attitude toward life. Joe truly was committed to his craft. He lived and worked with an intensity, as though life was meant to be swallowed, not sipped. Joe pursued the facts doggedly as a journalist through in-depth interviewing, through the way that he placed public records requests, through his developing of sources over time, and through his voracious reading. When Joe was asked to cover the 2016 presidential election, as just one example, he read every book that he could find about Donald Trump, and he did what he called the slow, bleary-eyed scut work of reading 26,000 online reviews of Trump products. Yes, very fun. When he was assigned to the healthcare beat, as yet another example, technical books, research publications, and everything else he could get his hands on about healthcare started stacking up on his desk. Perhaps more impressively, he read and understood the Affordable Care Act. Can those in Congress say the same? Joe also took delight in the hard-earned joy of piecing words together to form a kind of mosaic. And that wasn't easy work. It involved often staying up through the night, writing and rewriting, as any writer knows, until he produced something that was truly beautiful and compelling, and often very witty. Joe was clearly a hard worker and a genius, but those were far from the most important things about him. What I think is more important is that he treated people with kindness, regardless of whether they agreed with him or not, regardless of whether they could ever offer him anything in return, regardless of their social status in life. Joe carried himself with a humility in his interactions with people. He didn't brag about the many heads of state that he got to meet at the Journal, and he downplayed his own breaking into journalism rather than saying that he was so talented. He said he caught a break. He became known by many people for his inexhaustible generosity. Despite how incredibly busy he was and how prolific he was at his writing, he took the time to serve on the Dartmouth Review's board of directors, giving back to his alma mater, and he mentored students all across the country. I know I can speak for myself when I say I would not be here tonight if it weren't for the people like Joe in my own life who sacrificed their time to make my career as a journalist possible. After hearing all of this and thinking about the many prolific and complex articles he wrote, you might expect that Joe, as a very serious intellectual reporting on serious topics, would have been humorless and hopeless. But his attitude toward life was quite the opposite, as Paul indicated. He took my example of the Ivanka Trump scarves. So I'll give you another example, which is that he tracked down a Trump board game and had the interns play it. Joe had a great sense of humor, and he clearly knew how to have fun. You can find countless examples of his wit in his writing, but his humor wasn't just performative. He also enjoyed a good laugh, even in private. One of his favorite words, which you can find penciled into the margins of many of his books, was hilarious. Beyond his humor, Joe also carried something deeper inside himself: hope. An editor who knew him well praised him for his allegro spirit. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm saying that Joe was a blind optimist. He was a realist. He saw the world and human nature for what they were. Yet, he kept his upbeat attitude. He once wrote, "I have tried to present the issues as they are, and while I'm often let down, I try not to get down." He once attended a conference for conservative journalists, and he came away struck by the dark moods of the attendees. He described them as indignant, resentful, persecuted, livid, and grim. Doesn't sound like a very fun party to me. In a piece for the Dartmouth Review, as he wrote about this, he wrote that this attitude should not be part of the conservative mentality. We should be realistic, but not so deeply pessimistic. He wrote, "Something wicked will always be coming, but it can be held off. That's the basic job of the conservative, after all, to defend what should be preserved and, when appropriate, to improve what needs improvement. The world will always lack. That's no reason to wallow in night thoughts." Joe believed in the power of good ideas, and so should we. I believe that sometimes the only thing strong enough to overcome a bad idea is a good one. Joe's attitude reminds me just a little bit of Sam Gamgee's in Lord of the Rings. When it seemed that all was lost and Middle-earth was engulfed in shadows, Sam turned to his friend and said, "There's still some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for." So when we leave here tonight, inspired by Joe's example, let's remember to do our work well, to be kind to others, and no matter how grim things get out there, to hold on to humor and hope. Thank you.
Sierra, that was quite a tribute. How about another round of applause? Wow. Thank you to the Fund for American Studies, Novak Fellows. It's just an honor to be here. I'm Lucas Tomlinson with the Fox News Channel. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome and to give the Outstanding Journalism Award to my colleague and dear friend, Mr. Benjamin Hall. It seems like yesterday that Ben and I were in Georgetown enjoying a pint, talking about his new life in Washington. He was adjusting to the State Department, and after all the madness you've seen, Ben, on Capitol Hill these last few days, aren't you glad you're in London right now? One thing I know is that my father, Kenneth Tomlinson, would be thrilled that Benjamin is the recipient of this award in his name. This is a recipient about integrity, about outstanding journalism, and most importantly, about resilience. And I don't think there's anybody I know that is more resilient than Benjamin Hall. Just a little bit about my father. As an associate editor with the Reader's Digest's Washington Bureau, my father wrote a piece in the February 1973 Reader's Digest. I found it this morning, actually, 1 month after Joe Biden came to Washington as a U.S. Senator for the first time. Richard Nixon was president, believe it or not, for the young folks out there. The piece was entitled, "New Profiles in Courage." My father, who had reported from the battlefields of Vietnam, later came back and profiled a number of American soldiers who had been critically wounded in battle. He traveled around the country. He tracked them all down. He spoke to one American soldier who had been shot in the back in the Vietnam Central Highlands in 1968. He was a farmer, and he went out to the farm, and he was blown away by this soldier who every day, even though he was in a wheelchair, put himself on a tractor every single day to farm. Had the best crops, the cattle sold for the highest prices, and he continued on. Another young Army officer who was leading paratroopers in the Ashaw Valley, one of the most dangerous parts of Vietnam, he tracked him down after he had been wounded, came home. He walked, he surprised his family with new prosthetics, and he later attended law school and finished first in his class and was president. These are stories of resilience. And coincidentally, by the way, in that same copy of the February 1973 Reader's Digest, one article below my father's was a piece entitled, "A Clear Call to Congress, Control Spending Now." Nothing's changed. It was written by Cap Weinberger, by the way, who went on to be Reagan's defense secretary, of course. So my father knew something about resilience. When he was 5 years old, his father died in a mill accident in Southwest Virginia's Appalachian Mountains. In fact, where's Anthony? You should go to his old hometown of Galax. There he is. There you go. Get to Galax. That's where my old man was from. In 1960, a 16-year-old Ken Tomlinson boarded a Trailways bus headed to Washington, D.C., an overnight bus. His ticket was taped to his lapel to begin a career in journalism that would take him from an internship to the top of the Reader's Digest as an editor-in-chief of the world's most widely read magazine. He was later appointed director of the Voice of America by Ronald Reagan during the height of the Cold War, whose shortwave broadcasts, I'm a little biased when I say this, helped defeat the evil empire, because they were broadcasting the truth. He later, after he was retired, was called back after his time at the Reader's Digest after 9/11 to serve as chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors and chairman of the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and he had this novel idea about balance with taxpayer-funded initiatives for the airwaves. And of course, the blowback he received for that made some of these pro-Palestinian protests look like a pep rally. That's why you would be so pleased tonight, Ben, for you to receive this award in his name, and why he'd be proud of your resilience, as we all are at the Fox News Channel. Now to Ben. How many here would go to war-torn Libya, Iraq, Syria, Somalia for 8 years as a freelance reporter without security or a plan to leave, and later to Afghanistan as a foreign correspondent with our intrepid cameraman, Pierre? His drive to report from the battlefield, to go where few Westerners would dare to go, separates Ben from most men I know. Perhaps it's in the genes. Ben's father, Roderick Hall, was practically an orphan in the Philippines. He was 12 when the Japanese conquered the Philippines. The Battle of Manila, one of the bloodiest battles of World War II, saw Ben's grandfather, grandmother, aunt, and uncle all taken prisoner, never to be seen or heard from again. Ben's father had to care for his 3 younger siblings for nearly 4 years. And some 6,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded in the Battle of Manila to retake the Philippines. And when Rod saw those American GIs, he ran toward them with his siblings, getting shot at under sniper fire. And when he reached those soldiers, the 37th Division, the Buckeye Division, they saved his life. And he never forgot that. He was grateful his entire life. And like his father, Ben would also count on the U.S. military to rescue him. Ben and all of us who know him know that he's alive today thanks to the heroism of a select group of U.S. forces and a nonprofit group called Save Our Allies, led by Sarah Verardo. By now, what happened to Ben in Ukraine is well documented. Pierre, Sasha, and 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed when Russian forces destroyed the vehicle he was traveling in outside of Kyiv in March of 2022, not long after the invasion. Ben could have sat this one out. He was assigned to the State Department, could have covered the war from there. He had done his time. But when the phone rang after the Russian invasion and you were asked, do you want to go? He did not hesitate. If not for Save Our Allies and our colleague Jennifer Griffin, who is familiar with Save Our Allies because of their work with special operators who had gone into Afghanistan the year prior to evacuate those hundreds, thousands of interpreters and Americans who were left behind. They knew something about extraction. And of course, Jennifer Griffin had them on speed dial, Special Operations, National Mission Force, Pegasus package, all that. She had it. I asked Jen for her reflections on Ben, the journalist he is, and for those harrowing moments of getting him out. By the way, you really need to read Ben's book, Saved. His agent is nodding. It's an incredible story. But here's Jen. She was like, take some of this, take off. I was like, I'm going to take this whole thing. I've known many wounded warriors for more than a decade who have had to cope with similar wounds, but no one has ever had the positive, infectious attitude that Benjamin Hall exhibited on that fateful day and has ever since. His doctors told us they have never seen anything like it. His positivity motivates everyone around us. And I speak for the entire Fox News channel, the whole network, when I say yes. It motivates all of us. When Sea Spray, Bo White, Doc Rich approached checkpoint after checkpoint that night in Kyiv in the ambulance, there was a 72-hour curfew and shoot-to-kill orders to shoot anybody on sight, anyone that moved. As they inched toward that last checkpoint, hands in the air, Ukrainian troops did not believe that Benji was actually injured. They thought he might be a Russian soldier faking injuries to get past the checkpoint. So they unwrapped his bandages to see the missing limb. At that point, the morphine had worn off. The pain must have been excruciating. Still, at every turn, even the videos taken on board the train, and by train, this is the Prime Minister of Poland's secret train. They had gone in to meet President Zelensky. We could see from the headset worn by Sea Spray, who recorded the journey, Benji said, please and thank you to all the rescuers profusely. He had perfect manners throughout the long journey to the Polish border and on to Landstuhl. He is the most infectiously positive person I've ever met and inspires us all every day. Minutes matter during the rescue. If any one thing had not happened like clockwork, we would not be here with Benji tonight. You cannot help but think there was a higher force at work, and I think about that often. No tribute to Ben would be complete without a word from our other colleague, Trey Yingst. Trey was kind enough to finally get a ceasefire, Ben, to scrape together a few words. In fact, it was an audio message. You could hear the rockets in the background, some outgoing artillery from those Israeli 109s. He said, Benji's the type of war correspondent we all aim to be. He is empathetic, driven, passionate, and does the job for the right reasons. He is a role model for the entire industry, and all while maintaining a beautiful family. He's not only one of the best journalists I know, he's one of the best fellows I know. The only thing I would attempt to add, and it's hard to top that, is my first impressions of Ben. I would see this guy come on the screen from Mosul. He just started working at Fox. Might have been a freelancer then, actually. I just could not believe how close this guy was to the battlefield. I could not believe it. Without air support, without 9-line, without a National Mission Force, infantry, other soldiers. I just could not believe it, and I was just glued, as I think all of us were when they saw Ben's reporting. When I really couldn't take my eyes off the screen was 2019 in Baghouz, when you saw the end of the ISIS caliphate. And it was play by play, town by town, you and Pierre, bringing things to the public that nobody else was bringing. And it was incredible. His piece from the Invictus Games in Germany was the kind of human interest piece that I know your wife, Alicia, Ben, preferred, as well as your 3 young daughters. And they inspired you to do these kind of pieces. and they're in short supply today. But before we break, just maybe one more story. I recently returned from a 3-week stint in Israel. And today, when I was passing those tens of thousands, or actually hundreds of thousands, 290,000, got some new reporting on this, 290,000 for the March for Israel on the mall today. So I was going to Union Station. My mind went back to Israel and this group of American students studying in Jerusalem. I interviewed some of them. I started asking about the war, and this is before Israel had launched their ground invasion of Gaza. I started asking these questions about the military, and I'm like, LT, dude, these are 17-year-old kids. They're not getting caught up in military tactics. And I thought, ask them about the protests back home. And that's when the floodgates open. And I asked this one young man, Orrin Goodman, probably be a U.S. Senator one day, I'm not surprised. He was like, Lucas, I love the Palestinian people. I'm like, okay, I got it. I asked him, are you nervous about going back to college? Because he had been accepted into NYU. As we aired on Fox, there were people tearing down posters of the hostages, some as young as 5, 6, 7. He says, I am nervous. I'm very nervous about going. But if I don't go, who will speak for the Jews? I was very struck by that. To our award winners tonight, you are the vehicle for that voice. You all have done incredible work. It's your job to give a voice to those that don't have it. You don't need me to tell you this. That's why you're all driven to be here tonight. You wouldn't be receiving awards if you didn't understand that. Go find that liberty and that leadership that this Fund for American Studies is all about. And if my father were alive today, Ben, you would be included in the follow-up edition to New Profiles in Courage. It is with great pleasure and honor that I present the Kenneth Y. Tomlinson Award for Outstanding Journalism to Mr. Benjamin Hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor to be standing here in front of you today, and I'm so honored to have seen some of the young journalists come up earlier. It fills me with so much pride as to what I know will be carried out in the future, and how the journalism that I perhaps thought was maybe waning is not, it is strong as ever. It's funny standing here today because I was, for many years, a war correspondent, and I told the stories of people who were injured in war, and I spent 15 years speaking to them, watching them, finding them, tracking stories, going places that no one else could get to because I thought that was the way of telling the story. And then suddenly I became the story. And for many, many years, I always wondered to myself, what would it be like if I was in that position? If I was the rebel fighter, so badly injured, or the mother who's lost all her children, or the fighters trying to save their friends. And last year, I experienced many of those emotions. I went through it myself. And I stand here today, both as someone who has witnessed war, experienced war, and the product of war through my own family and my father's experiences, but I'm also a survivor of war. And I stand here feeling stronger than I've ever felt before. And I feel that because I feel convinced that the reason I was out there, the reason I was injured, is because we were doing something that was so important. It's so important for ourselves, for our community, for our freedom, which is telling the truth to our viewers and our readers, our listeners. And I feel that stronger than ever. And for those of you who don't know what happened that day, March 14th, Lucas laid it out very well. But I was badly injured by a Russian rocket attack. 5 of us in the car. I lost my right leg, my left foot, shrapnel in my eye, burns across my body, my hand almost torn off. But most sadly is that Pierre, cameraman, who was like a brother to me, who had traveled the world we had together, he died alongside me that day, along with Sasha, our fixer, and 2 Ukrainians. And I now think to this day, and people ask me, if you could change it all, you could heal yourself up, if you get rid of your injuries, but never have done a day's work of journalism, would you take it? And to a heart I say no, absolutely not. I think that what we do and what every journalist out there is doing right now is essential. And I got to pay tribute right now to all those journalists in Ukraine, in Israel, in all those other countries around the world, and of course to Evan Gershkovich as well, who is suffering for what he did. It's really noble, and I stand here not because I was injured or because of my experiences, because I stand here just to tell you all that journalism is essential. Supporting journalism is essential. It is the only way to encourage people to change the world. And there's only one way of doing that as a journalist. That is by going to the field, looking people in the eye, smelling what it's like, feeling it. There is no other sense of journalism. And I have been worried over the years about the internet, about social media, about this changing. Perhaps people would pull back. But again, today, I am so proud to see young, up-and-coming journalists who will get out there. I know the rabbi talked about oppression and tyranny. And I think we see an awful lot of that around the world right now. But I think, again, I'm an example. I hope that you can see it, you can be up close to it, you can witness it, but you can also get through it. And resilience helps you do that. Community helps you do that. And journalism helps you do that. I wouldn't be here today were it not for some incredible colleagues, friends, family members. Everyone at Fox has been there for me from the minute this happened, and that is family. We work together side by side in all of it. The doctors, the Ukrainian soldiers, the US soldiers who picked me up the way they picked my father up 75 years ago. I'm a product of America going around the world and saving lives, and it is something that makes me so proud to be an American as well. But we also need to teach ourselves that there is more strength inside all of us, and that when things are difficult, when there is oppression, when there is tyranny, that it is together through our own strength, through our own resilience, that we do get through that. And I found that out on the train when I was leaving Ukraine. I remember lying there. Lucas was talking about it. No pain meds. It was a difficult time. But there came a moment where I had to decide to go one of 2 directions. One of them was to succumb to it and to let that all out. And the other one was just to keep my mouth shut and realize that the experts were doing what they did best and that there was another level of strength inside us. And I managed to get through that train journey with my head held high, without uttering a single whimper, because of community, because of the people around me. So I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and remind you all that we are all community. We are community in journalism, we are community in our country, we are community in our families, we are community in friends. And whatever you do, keep pushing for that. In journalism, keep reminding people of that. It's the essential thing. So thank you to everyone for coming tonight. Thank you so much for this award. And just know that no matter how bad the oppression or the tyranny is out there, there is a way through it, and I stand here as a prime example of that. Thank you very much.
Next up, please welcome to the stage Ed Craig.
Good evening, people. Just testing. Obviously, I am not Lindsay Craig. She is at home sick, and so my name is Ed Craig, Lindsay's husband, filling in dutifully to present the Fund for American Studies 2023 Thomas L. Phillips Career Achievement Award. I have a little note from Lindsay. As a TFAS, as a TFAS board member, I am so pleased that this award is recognizing Brian Anderson for his excellent leadership at City Journal. This is timely, well-received recognition of his enduring contributions to journalism. Also, Roger, I have a doctor's note from Lindsay. I'll give that to you later. Aside from being Lindsay's husband, I had the joy and honor of working with Brian Anderson for his first 10 years at City Journal. So hopefully I can offer something apropos this evening. But keep your expectations low, and you won't be disappointed. I remind Lindsay of that bit of cynical wisdom every day, by word or deed. That's a joke, obviously, and wholly inappropriate for this occasion, actually. I'm sitting tonight with Larry Moan and his wife, Kathy. When Larry was president at the Manhattan Institute, every quarter, he'd walk down the hallway to the ink-stained wretches of City Journal in the bullpen and ask Brian, how is the issue coming? The answer, without fail, would be, it's our best issue ever. That's Brian in a nutshell right there. Expectations are always high for City Journal. It's a well-written, for starters, and thus well-edited. The deftly deployed adjective that does the work of a sentence. An argument proceeding logically. Intelligible topic sentence into intelligible topic sentence. To borrow Myron Magnet, the former editor, Brian and I's former boss, his favorite simile, like a train of circus elephants, tail to trunk, tail to trunk. Ideas have consequences. City Journal has shown time and again it is possible for a 5,000-word essay to shift the public conversation, expand the Overton window, if you like, make politically possible something that only months before would have been unthinkable. City Journal has long been the home of iconoclastic thinking, from game changers like Bill Bratton, Peter Huber, and the peerless Heather McDonald. It remains so under Brian's leadership. Brian is now in his 17th year as editor, longer than anyone. In fact, this time next year, Brian will have been City Journal editor for longer than all its other editors combined. The peerless Heather McDonald is still there, but also Guy Sormont, Steve Malanga, Ed Glazer, Christopher Rufo. The Fund for American Studies has chosen wisely. To study America is to study Western civilization, of course. The men who gathered in Philadelphia and New York to concoct this experiment in self-government were students of the political controversies of London and Paris, students of philosophical controversies and debates in Scottish university towns, students also of Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. Students necessarily become teachers in time. This is the quintessential conservative activity, is it not, to pass on what has been received? To borrow the technical terms from St. Paul in the Greek, to paradidomi what has been paralambanoed. I promised Larry I would throw some Greek in here. But wisdom is still a book that is being written and redacted. Of course, Alexander Hamilton didn't know what a South Park conservative was, but he would have liked them. Prudence is required to know what deserves inclusion and when the time is right for rehearsing one of history's abject lessons. Brian is, among other things, an expert on the French political philosopher Raymond Aron, one of the 20th century's most astute critics of Marxist thought. In politics, the statesman is one who is able to recognize his political moment, to prudentially choose the right course for a particular here and now. Statesmen are rare. Tonight, we honor the journalistic equivalent of a statesman. Why do I so look forward to receiving City Journal in the mail? Why is it the best it's the best publication in the company. I went to National Review for 10 years. City Journal is the best publication in the country. Why? Not simply because it is a reminder that ideas, good and bad, have consequences, or that in life there are always trade-offs. Those are important, yes. City Journal is a beautiful 128-page reminder that our civilization still exists, however harried it might be at the moment, and that it deserves to be defended and celebrated. For that, I'm always grateful to crack open the new issue. Plus, I know it's going to be the best issue ever. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian C. Anderson.
Well, thank you, Ed, for those gracious comments. I'm sorry Lindsay is sick, but I can't imagine her comments would have been warmer. And given our past history at City Journal, I'm particularly appreciative. And congratulations, too, it's a little daunting to follow you, to the Tomlinson honoree this year, Fox News' Benjamin Hall, who was gravely injured, as you heard, reporting from Kyiv, defending what is truly a noble cause of informing the public as a war correspondent. Now let me start by saying simply how honored I am to receive this award, but also that I should find a way to give a prize to the Fund for American Studies. Above all, for its Novak Fellowship, which is extended, as you heard earlier, to a number of young journalists every year, to research and report on a topic related to the Free Society. Now, several recipients over the years have intersected with City Journal. A past fellow, Charles McElwee, was an editor at the magazine. He's at Real Clear Politics now. He still writes for us. Our newest member of our editorial team, and please, Paul Gigot, do not steal this one. I think we're up to 3 or 4 now. John Hirschauer, he's a tremendous talent. He's currently finishing up a fellowship writing on the nation's dysfunctional mental health system. And as you heard earlier, 2 MI colleagues, a contributing editor at City Journal, Charles Lehman, and Dan DiMartino, a young scholar at MI, are both fellows for this year's cohort. All this is to say that the Novak Fellowship, like the Rago Fellowship, has become a pipeline for developing conservative talent, and with so many in the media embracing a kind of woke agenda, cultivating the next generation of non-woke journalists is really fundamental and important. So thank you to the Fund for American Studies. Informed journalism has long been fundamental to City Journal's project. My great predecessor as editor, who Eddie mentioned, Myron Magnet, knew that putting a face to the abstractions of policy choices makes them come alive, so that the stakes in human lives become clear. And I've tried to maintain that spirit for 16 or 17 years now as editor of the magazine. Now, we do many kinds of pieces. detailed policy arguments, very wonky things, philosophical and cultural essays, even an occasional short story. But one of the wonders of working for a magazine like City Journal is that you're working with and learning from so many remarkable, brilliant talents on a daily basically. But reported works, the kind of journalism that we're celebrating tonight, can have a transformative effect on public debate. And let me give just two brief examples from City Journal's history. She was mentioned earlier tonight, but Heather McDonald's relentless investigations into crime and punishment have given voice to the victims of violence and disorder and to the men and women of law enforcement who try to keep our communities safe, often under dangerous conditions, even as the elite media portray them with little basis in fact, as Heather argues, as bigoted brutes. She's almost single-handedly provided a counter to that mainstream narrative. Now, Heather is also a deserved past recipient of the Fund for American Studies Kenneth Tomlinson Award for courageous journalism. She's not a foreign correspondent, but I do recall one story she wrote for us where she spent time wandering in the Mission District in San Francisco, talking to junkies and dealers, and even purchased some fentanyl to explore what the process looked like, showing a real dedication to getting a truthful story. And of course, she's been, as she's written in the Wall Street Journal, been the target of riotous attempts to shout her down when she speaks on campus about her work. My second example of the power of reporting is a newer City Journal writer, Christopher Rufo. His emergence as one of the most influential conservative figures in America has been propelled by his groundbreaking stories for City Journal, exposing the influence of critical race theory and radical gender ideology in public schools and other institutions. Now, Chris's work manages to combine old-fashioned shoe leather journalism. Somebody mentioned that earlier tonight. I think it was Roger. Many of his sources have been whistleblowers, whether in schools, businesses, or medical officers. He combines that with a deep understanding of left-wing ideology and a real gift for explaining that ideology in clear language to a general audience, which is so crucial. Read now by millions of Americans, Rufo's investigative pieces have led several states to crack down on these pernicious practices and have helped give rise to a nationwide parental rights movement. Both Heather and Chris are incredibly vigorous writers, they're sharp minds, but it's their reporting, their journalism, that has helped them change the American debate in key areas. So, speaking for my entire team at City Journal, including my longtime editorial colleagues Paul Beston and Steve Malanga and Nicole Gelinas, we're very lucky to work for a think tank that for decades now, under its former president, Larry Mohn, and now Raihan Salam, and with the backing of our incredibly generous trustees and donors, has been willing to support an ambitious journalistic enterprise like ours. And we're thrilled that TFAS has recognized that effort. Second point, looking at the previous winners of this award is humbling. All are major figures in the history of conservative journalism. Some continue to regularly influence our work at City Journal, including, of course, Paul Gigot, whose Wall Street Journal editorial page is a daily ritual for us, and Roger Kimball, a source of advice and inspiration to me, and whose new criterion sets the highest standard for cultural commentary. As for the man this journalism award is named after, Thomas J. Phillips, he was a patriot and defender of the free society. Our country, he observed late in life, was established on the unique principle that the citizens are in charge, rather than government or a ruling class of elites. As he keenly understood, a robust and informed public debate is essential for the flourishing of this American ideal, and such debate relies considerably on what we once used to call the free press. New threats have emerged almost daily to the free press. Some years ago, I wrote a book on how technology was transforming media. The internet and digitalization generally were opening countless new opportunities for expression. Right-of-center argument and analysis would benefit, I predicted, since the elite press was then, as now, generally pretty hostile to the right. And that proved true with the arrival of conservative blogs winning huge readerships and magazines like City Journal, which had been a small circulation magazine aimed at an audience of influential people, transforming into a much larger enterprise with millions of online readers. Now, I warned in that book that the left hated this newly competitive media universe and would try to shut it down, and we've seen that transpire over the last several years in dramatic fashion. With the emergence of cancel culture and kindred illiberal phenomena, the former CIA analyst Martin Gurry calls this the new censorship. And perhaps the most alarming development has taken place on social media platforms. What the so-called Twitter files revealed earlier this year was a dark collaboration between progressive elites, federal security agencies, and then Twitter officials to get the platform to prevent or diminish the visibility of posts they didn't like, deeming them disinformation. Now, the views, needless to say, were almost all those that opposed the left's vision of reality, whether that concerned Hunter Biden's laptop or pandemic response measures or the latest actions of Donald Trump. It was only Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter that made this behind-the-scenes effort fully visible, but other big tech firms have engaged in these practices as well, and including in our own experience at City Journal in 2021, Facebook civically downgraded City Journal to use its Orwellian language, objecting, for example, to articles by the former New York Times science reporter John Tierney and others that reported on studies showing that no hard evidence backed government mask mandates as an effective means of curbing COVID-19, or that raised questions about the possible origins of the virus in a Chinese lab, or that simply reported facts about crime patterns in America. Our web traffic referrals from Facebook basically vanished to nothing. But the examples of such interventions are abundant now, from YouTube diminishing the visibility of PragerU videos to Amazon removing, for a time, Abigail Schreier's important book on gender radicalism. And I'm sure most of you could think of many other examples. None of the cases that I've just mentioned of disinformation is extremist or bigoted. They all make arguments, provide evidence, try to persuade exactly how things should proceed in a democracy. Yet they still wound up civically downgraded. This is an outrageous violation of what Thomas Phillips celebrated as the core American principle, that citizens and not ruling elites should be in charge of our republic. Now, thankfully, this new censorship is getting political and legal pushback, and there's obviously much more that could be said about this. But supporting independent organizations like the Fund for American Studies, the Manhattan Institute, my employer, National Review, similar groups, is going to be really fundamental and important in the battle to resist this illiberal plan to set the boundaries of what the American people can and cannot legitimately think. So, my thanks again to the Fund for American Studies and its president, Roger Ream, for this wonderful award, and to my colleagues at City Journal and the Manhattan Institute for their vision, and to my lovely wife, Amy, for tolerating my sometimes consuming commitment to work. Thank you very much.
Just a couple things quickly before we run off. First of all, we have copies of Benjamin Hall's book for everyone. You can pick it up on your way out. You must read it, and after you read it, you must buy it as presents for all your friends for Christmas. But don't start it in the evening because you won't get any sleep. It's one of those books you can't put down. It's a remarkable story that he's written. We also have copies of the latest current issue of the City Journal for you, so please pick one of those up as well. I want to thank everyone for their support. I hope you take as much inspiration from Brian Anderson and Benjamin Hall as I do. We're grateful that Ben flew here from his home in England and left his wife and kids for a few days to be with us, which we're really grateful for. You'll get to know his family very well if you read his book. They've been wonderful, and I want to make sure you do read it. I also had the opportunity last week through technology to have Ben on my Liberty and Leadership podcast. So please listen to that when it comes out the week after Thanksgiving, and that'll give you more of the story of his courage and resilience. Thank you so much for your support. Please stay in touch with us, and we'll come together again next year. Good evening.